a Kharja, agus a Camradiha. Please join me in giving a huge Derry and Donegal welcome to Zarah Sultana MP.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Tony. I want to thank May, Tony, Robin, the entire Bloody Sunday Trust, the Bloody Sunday families for having me here today. And their hospitality has been absolutely immaculate, including Tony's this afternoon. There are things that I will never be able to repeat in public, but he's good value. I've been taught so much, but there's one thing that I haven't been able to get to the bottom of. Whose thumbs were in the window of the Guildhall on the 15th of June? I'm told it's Tony's, we don't know, and I'll leave it there on that note. More seriously, I do actually want to quickly extend my solidarity to ethnic minority communities here in the north of Ireland, in Ballymena, and what we know throughout history is that time and time again, when those in power can no longer defend the indefensible, they do what they always have, which is to scapegoat the most vulnerable. We see far-right leaders stoke racism and division to mask their failures, and we see centrists pander. It's disgusting to see a Labour Prime Minister copy the fascist language of Enoch Powell, using the phrase "island of strangers," while also claiming that immigration has caused incalculable damage to British society. This is so dangerous and reckless, given the fact that we have witnessed far-right fascist attacks on migrant hotels in Knowsley and in Southport, which have been ignited by far-right agitators online who have spread disinformation. And the truth is, our political and media class want to make us believe that desperate families, not billionaires, are responsible for the crisis we live in. And it quickly, I just want to touch on a poem that Michael Rosen has written, which captures this perfectly. He writes, "I sometimes fear that people think that fascism arrives in fancy dress, worn by grotesques and monsters. Fascism arrives as your friend. It will restore your honour. It will make you feel proud, protect your house, give you a job, clean up your neighbourhood. But make no mistake, we all know that fascism isn't history. We can hear its growls today, and we all have a part to play in defeating that kind of politics." And now on the topic that I've been invited to talk to you about today, I want to begin by talking about hunger. And in many ways, hunger is the defining moral issue of our times. It is why each winter we are united in our outrage that people in the 6th wealthiest country in the world must choose between heating and eating. It's why across these islands, the two-child benefit cap has become a lightning rod for public anger. We see it here in Derry, where a quarter of children now live in poverty, and in my city of Coventry, where the figure rises to nearly 40%. But hunger isn't just a moral issue, it's a deeply political one with far-reaching social consequences, and it always has been. It was the Great Hunger that drove migration from Ireland to places like Coventry, doubling the Irish population within 2 decades. And we see hunger used in its most barbaric form today in Gaza, where it's wielded by Israel as a weapon of war against 2 million children, 2 million people, half of them children. But why am I talking about hunger today? That is because while hunger is such a solemn index of injustice and a weapon in the hands of the powerful, it has also been one of the major triggers for social transformation by the oppressed and downtrodden throughout history. Throughout history, it is hunger alongside hubris and humiliation that has driven the downtrodden and the oppressed to fight back, to struggle, and to win. Those were the very conditions faced by those who fought for truth and justice after Bloody Sunday. It was humiliation, the daily indignities of discrimination and unemployment, compounded by the brutality of internment that led the civil rights movement here in the north and to that fateful day in the Bogside in January 1972, where people treated like second-class citizens, where the state had gerrymandered their subjugation. It was hubris, the arrogance and impunity of the British state that confronted the families of those murdered and wounded, The infamous Widgery Report, whitewash is an understatement, gave the killers a clean bill of health, paving their way for their promotion and burying the truth. And it was hunger, a different type of hunger, a hunger for justice that drove the families to fight on for decades against the full weight of the entire British state until finally in 2010 their struggle broke through. 15 years ago, the Saville Report finally told the world what you in Derry always knew, that on January the 30th, 1972, the British Army shot dead 14 unarmed civil rights protesters, wounded many more, and lied about it. Not for days, not for weeks, but for decades. It took 38 years for the state to admit the truth. And even then, it only happened because families, campaigners, and communities refused to back down, refused to forget, refused to accept the state's lies, refused to accept that the lives of working class Irish Catholics were worth less in the eyes of the powerful. So we gather here today not to simply mark a date in history, but to honour a legacy of struggle. Bloody Sunday was not just an atrocity, it was a flashpoint, a moment when the mask slipped and the true face of state violence was exposed to the world. But if this was a story of just the past, we wouldn't be here today. We're here because lessons still cry out to be heard, because justice is still being denied, because the forces that made Bloody Sunday possible, imperialism, racism, and class oppression, are still with us. And the Saville Report wasn't perfect. It came far too late, and full legal accountability still hasn't been served. We still need justice for Gerald Dahi, prosecutions for those who were responsible. But it mattered because it vindicated what families had always said. The truth was on their side. And when Prime Minister David Cameron stood in the House of Commons and said what happened on Bloody Sunday was both unjustified and unjustifiable, he did what no British leader had done before. He admitted that the British state had killed its own citizens and lied about it. But let us be clear, that was not an act of goodwill. It was the product of pressure, of organising, of refusal, a refusal to let the state bury the dead twice, once in the ground and once in silence. And this is why public inquiries matter, not because they always deliver justice, but because they create the conditions for truth. And truth is the foundation on which justice must be built. And today we have to be vigilant. We must ensure that our hunger for justice outlasts the state's fading appetite for accountability. Right now, this government, this Labour government, is turning their backs on these very principles. They are backtracking on the Hillsborough Law, missing their own deadline, diluting key safeguards, and offering a hollowed out duty light that fails bereaved families. And in 2021, the previous Conservative government passed the Overseas Operations Act, granting de facto amnesty to British troops for historic offences committed abroad, denying justice to the people of Iraq, Afghanistan and beyond. And closer to home, the shameful Legacy Act that shuts down legal routes, silences survivors and denies families the most basic right to know the truth about what happened to their loved ones during the Troubles. And this is a new playbook. Deny the act, deny the accountability, deny the history. But you showed, and the Bloody Sunday inquiry showed, that they can be beaten. But it must not be the last. Victims and survivors across Ireland still wait for the truth, still wait for justice. The Labour government promised to repeal the Legacy Act. It's in their manifesto. They must be held to it. We must have a return to the Stormont House Agreement because truth delayed is justice denied. And for many, the clock is ticking. Derry's Bogside belongs to a proud global history and global geography of struggle, from Sharpeville to Selma, from Soweto to Gaza. Places where people demanding dignity and equality were met with bullets, where peaceful protest was answered with tanks, batons and lies. Like I said before, Bloody Sunday wasn't an accident, it wasn't a breakdown in command, it was a calculated act of state repression by a government terrified by a movement demanding equality. And when those 14 people were murdered, the state declared not just war on the people, but war on truth, dehumanising victims, criminalising marchers, smearing the dead. This is not just the story of state violence, but the story of state propaganda. A machinery that doesn't just kill, but justifies the killing, turning victims into threats, burying the truth under decades of silence. And we see this time and time again. From the blacklisting of miners at Orgreave to the smearing of Hillsborough victims, from the cover-ups at Grenfell to the unanswered questions around the Stardust fire and the bombings in Dublin and Monaghan, from Windrush to the Post Office Horizon scandal, from the murder of John Charles de Menezes to the racism and brutality of Stop and Search. Each time working class communities demanded the truth, the state does everything it can to deny them. But through that grief, we see resilience, we see courage, a refusal to stay quiet, a refusal to accept injustice. And that is why many of us look to this part of the world and find inspiration. Solidarity is not abstract here. On this island, it is lived, it is visible, it is fierce. And maybe it's also why I ended up marrying into Irish heritage. My partner's family come from Artane, moved to Birmingham, a migration story that many can relate to. But time and time again, the Irish people have stood with the oppressed, not out of charity, but out of shared experience, a deep instinct for justice born out of your own history. This is a country where there are murals in towns and cities declaring support for Palestine, for Kurdistan, for Cuba, with the names of Palestinians massacred in Gaza recited alongside those in Ballymurphy and Bloody Sunday, where school children know the meaning of apartheid, not just from textbooks, but from the stories told in their homes and in their communities. It is not symbolic, it is active. Irish people have joined Sumud's People's Convoy to Gaza, risking their safety to bring aid, but also to bear witness. They've blockaded weapons factories, they've marched in their thousands, they've refused to be silent when war crimes are committed with Western complicity. And this is not new. Irish internationalism is part of a long tradition, from the Dons, Stores strikers refusing to handle South African goods to countless Irish activists who joined the international brigades to support the Spanish Republic, freedom flotillas, truth commissions, and people's tribunals across the globe. Because you know what it's like to be brutalised by empire, and you know what it means to fight back. You see the connections between the checkpoints in Hebron and the old watchtowers in South Al-Mar, between administrative detention in Israel and internment without trial here, between the bombs dropped on Gaza and the bombs once dropped on Dublin and Monaghan. Internationalism here isn't just a posture, it is a practice. And it reminds us that the fight for freedom is global, and that no people are free until we are all free. And this moral geography of struggle is important because Ireland is not alone in its struggle. It's part of a global current of repression and revolt. And these currents I myself am connected to by virtue of being a descendant of empire from Kashmir. They connect up Ireland, Britain's first colony, to the British Raj, Britain's most important colony, out to Palestine and Gaza today, to the weeping scars of British colonialism we are all bearing witness to through a live stream genocide. We can see this connection clearest in the brutal repression meted out by British governments in the early 20th century against anti-colonial revolt in all three places. We saw how those governments, to preserve their ill-gotten gains, stretched the boundaries of policing from detention without trial, trials without juries, and punctuated through military massacres. The lessons learned from putting down the Easter Rising and at Jallianwala Bagh in Punjab mere years later were then put in practice in Britain's policing of Mandate Palestine thereafter. Decades later, the repressive prevention of terrorism laws introduced on the mainland during the Troubles would become consolidated into the Terrorism Acts, which at this very moment are being used to repress and prosecute activists mobilising against the genocide in Gaza. And the Bloody Sunday Trust has always stood up for more than just remembrance. It stands for justice, for solidarity, for internationalism, a message that isn't confined to one place, one conflict, or one generation, but one world and one struggle. And today that message echoes louder than ever. Because just as we remember the brutality of Bloody Sunday, we must confront the brutality of today. In Gaza, we are witnessing in real time a genocide, a destruction of a people. not as a consequence of war, but as a deliberate strategy of extermination, as state policy of this Israeli government. Hospitals bombed, schools obliterated, families buried alive, journalists assassinated, and behind it all, the same kind of lies, the same kind of machinery of denial, the same playbook we see time and time again. They are all terrorists, they use human shields, they brought it on themselves. The same logic used to smear the victims of Bloody Sunday, the same twisted reasoning used to execute state violence across the world, from the West Bank to Kashmir, from Ferguson to Rafah. The same torture techniques used here were tried and tested in Kenya and Yemen before, and later exported to Iraq and Guantanamo. The same terrorism laws used against Irish communities now criminalise Palestinian solidarity. The same denial of justice that haunted Derry now haunts Rafah, and yet we see the same spirit of defiance. People are fighting back, like they always do, just like they did here in Derry, just like they did in Soweto, just as they did on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, just as they did in Jenin, just as they do now. Every time they speak out when it's dangerous to do so. In Chile, the mothers of the disappeared still march. In Argentina, the grandmothers still demand answers. In Sudan, students and workers risk everything to stand against repression. This is a global cry for justice, for life, for memory, for an end to impunity, for freedom. And in each of those cases, those who rise up face a second battle, a battle to be heard. Because not only are their lives under attack, so is their truth and the truth of their struggle. Their voices are suppressed, their motives are questioned, their grief politicised, their resistance criminalised. And that's why international solidarity isn't a luxury, it is a necessity, it is an act of recognition. It says, your struggle is my struggle, your loss is my loss, and your fight is mine too. And I've spoken about the history, the historical importance of humiliation, hunger and hubris as triggers for movements for social transformation. But there is another factor that is central to all of these moments and movements, and that is hope. If there is hope, and there is always hope, it comes from young people. Across the world, students are rising for Palestine, walking out of lectures, occupying campuses, divesting from arms companies and fossil fuels, demanding their institutions stand on the right side of history. It is always young people who are the moral compass of any society who carry the torch of solidarity. Just like the young people who marched in Derry in 1972, just like those who stood up against the US invasion of Vietnam, just as those who stood up to apartheid, who stood with striking workers, hunger strikers, communities fighting for housing, for water, for life. Their voices are loud, their voices are clear, and they say no to genocide, no to occupation, and no to militarization. Yes to justice, yes to freedom, and yes to humanity. And young people will always be called naive. They are not naive, they are not reckless, they are courageous, and they are right. They are organised, grounded in history, informed by the present while focused on the future, refusing to be cowed by media slander, political pressure, or institutional threats. And every movement for justice has always been told to wait. It will happen, give it some time, maybe moderate your politics, be a bit more reasonable. But young people know that justice has never come from waiting, it has come from action. And their courage reminds us that solidarity is not a slogan, it is a commitment, it is a duty, and it is a way of life. And so if you hold any power, and we all hold power, you must use it to stand with the oppressed. Any platform, use it to speak the truth, to amplify the silenced, to oppose genocide, but not just in speeches or in votes in parliament, but in policy and action. It is not enough to mourn the past while enabling the crimes of the present. And if you honour the victims of Bloody Sunday, as everyone should, we must also fight for the victims of today. Otherwise our words are just that, words. And too many politicians condemn with one hand and fund war with the other. They speak of peace while backing bombs. They praise civil rights while criminalising protest. That hypocrisy must end. We need a politics that is rooted in moral clarity, one that recognises every life as equal, and one that refuses to deal in silence and complicity. Because the cost of silence, as the people of Derry know so well, is always paid by the most vulnerable. And history will ask us, which side were you on? And the UK government under Keir Starmer and David Lammy isn't just looking the other way. Right now, they are actively fueling a genocide. They claim to have suspended arms to Israel. This is a lie. This so-called partial suspension was a PR stunt. 29 out of 350 licenses suspended. The rest, still flowing. And the most lethal part, a deliberate carve-out for F-35 fighter jets, described as the most lethal by their own manufacturer. 15% of each of those is built with British parts, transferred through British RAF bases and through British airports, dropping UK-engineered bombs on Gaza, on hospitals, on schools, and so-called safe zones. These are flying in beast mode, carrying up to 18,000-pound bombs, and because Israel boasts, Gaza has no air defences. And this Labour government is led by a man who said that Israel has the right to cut off water and electricity. It continues to supply the parts that make these massacres that we are witnessing every single day possible, and it is also continuing to provide the surveillance from RAF Akrotiri. And in clear terms, it is deeply shameful, and to Keir Starmer and to David Lammy, shame on you. This should not be happening in our name, and we will fight back in every possible way, through demonstrations, through organising, through boycotts, to stop this genocide that is being committed. And now we have ministers who are saying that the UK military could be used to defend Israel as the Iraq playbook is back and the war drums are being banged. In that case, I say it has to be put to a vote so we can see which MPs are supporting a genocidal state. And that is the reality of where we are today, which is very bleak, if I'm honest with you. But we know that history has always been made by those that struggle, those that fight for honour and dignity against all the forces that are put up against them, against the humiliation that is rained upon them. Those who face down the powerful and puncture their overinflated sense of hubris and self-conceit. And those who were driven by a certain type of hunger, who were propelled by the visceral opposition to injustice that all of us must be guided by. We know that the struggle for truth is not over. It's not over in Ireland, it's not over in Palestine, it's not over anywhere. It is important that we are all collective in our organising. And I have lost the piece of paper that I was using, but what I will do is find it very quickly and say that what we learn in this part of the world is that the truth can be fought for and it can be won, that no lie, however powerful, lasts forever, that even the might of empire can be broken by ordinary people coming together and refusing to be silenced. So this year and going forward, we gather not to just look back, but to look forward, to rededicate ourselves to justice, to demand the truth for all victims of state violence, from Ballymurphy to Janine, from Ferguson to Rafah, and to say to the families of Gaza that we see you, we hear you, and we will not stop. Because just as the truth cannot be buried here in Derry, it will not be buried in Gaza. And one day, I hope to see a united Ireland and a free Palestine. And in the words of the Bloody Sunday Trust, one world, one struggle, until we are all free. Thank you so much.
Our next special guest is a reporter from Belfast who brought her mower along with her. By the way, her mower had to just herself outside as a rioter from West Belfast. So Alison, if you can keep your mower at peace at least for 1 minute, that would be fantastic.
I want to talk to you about a few things, but basically I want to go back to how you became involved in politics in the first place. I know like many people go through that sort of student politics route, but I always think you need to see it so you can be it. And I assume when you were growing up there were not very many female politicians or role models who you felt reflected yourself.
I was always interested in politics. I only saw people like Diane Abbott who represented my politics, a woman of colour who spoke out, who has faced enormous abuse, enormous challenges in her life. But other than that, the representation wasn't really there. And growing up in inner city Birmingham, no one really tells you can be an MP. Although our teachers were excellent and really encouraged us to achieve the best. I remember a story. I was in secondary school, a state comprehensive, and a police officer who had never visited my school went to the city council and said every kid in that school will be able to tell him which gang they're going to end up in. So the postcode that you lived at, the school that you went to, we were seen in a particular way. And growing up as a young Muslim, the war on terror didn't feel like just foreign policy, it was very much domestic policy. The prevent agenda, which actually manifested itself in many ways. The one way that I remember was cameras were installed in a predominantly Muslim part of Birmingham, and the community there was told it's for traffic purposes, traffic calming measures, only to find out that actually it was there to spy on the local community. And so I was shaped by all of these things happening around me, but in particular, austerity. I was part of the cohort of students who went to university and had tuition fees tripled. And I just saw politicians who had received free education, grants in many cases, taking away opportunities from young people. And it deeply angered me that education maintenance allowance was taken away from young working class kids. Then we were going to be saddled with debt. And at every point I felt like politicians were taking things away from us. And so I was a very angry young person. And then I went to Palestine, as Tony mentioned, and I didn't see myself as privileged, and suddenly my British passport lets me go through checkpoints. There are soldiers talking to me and making jokes while they're humiliating Palestinians and refusing them, abilities to go through checkpoints, to go to an eye hospital in Jerusalem. I went to Hebron, I saw bullets in people's houses. I heard stories where their kids would just go missing for hours because the IDF soldiers thought it was funny to terrorize the population there. And I just thought, how is this okay and allowed to happen? And we're not taught about it. And we are indirectly supporting it because our governments provide cover, they have trade with these settlements, or with at least, they say they don't have trade. So all of these things just shaped me. And then I was able to go through student politics around deaths in police custody. We were working with the Black Lives Matter campaign in the US and connecting those struggles because, people don't know the stories of state violence that happens in England and Wales and in the UK where people have died and there is very little state accountability. So the issues that politicise me weren't, the easy issues, not the issues that usually take you on a journey to Westminster, deaths in police custody, the prevent agenda, Islamophobia, racism, and Palestine. And so while I was card-carrying Labour member from the age of 17 under Ed Miliband, the Labour Party just didn't feel like a place where young people were welcome. I remember the controls on immigration mugs and all of those things. And then Jeremy becomes leader and young people aren't hated and we're offered hope and this possibility that things can change, and it was so exciting. And many of us then organised through Labour, and suddenly politics was exciting and a vehicle. And when I think of my journey now through the student movement, through the Labour Party, that just isn't possible for young people anymore.
Can I ask you, obviously the change, as you said, in the school tuition fees, which politicised you at that time, and you know that what that's about, and it's about keeping young working class people out of higher education, keeping them in a box, and then someone like Jeremy Corbyn comes along, who is the true definition of Labour, the old Labour of the left. You said that enthused you. Speak to me about, you think, the campaign against Jeremy Corbyn, how that was orchestrated, and how you have now ended up with, Keir Starmer as a leader, someone who would have been very, very at home in the Conservative Party of the past.
Jeremy threatened the status quo. He gave hope to millions of people. I remember the rallies, they were packed. It came at Glastonbury, all of these moments that people felt, oh my God, change is possible. And the media establishment and the political establishment just couldn't have someone that was critical of NATO, that was challenging British imperialism, that stood with the Palestinian people, that, I think that they were willing to accept someone who's going to tax the rich a little bit more and have, those kind of policies. But I think his solidarity with oppressed people in Latin America, in Palestine, in South Asia was something that the political establishment will never accept. But I think the backlash on Jeremy from the media, from even internally within the Labour Party, was so huge. We hear stories of how money was being kind of hidden in parts of the Labour Party to fund different elections for different people, and it was all kind of happening. So I don't think Jeremy's team and the left was as organised in dealing with that level of backlash from all of those very organised spaces. When I think of some of the things that The Guardian was publishing, when I think those kind of liberal outlets, people think it's like,
expect it from the Daily Mail, press, but it was coming
but it was from all corners, and I don't think we, the left, and the people around Jeremy, were able to deal with that level of backlash, and it was because we're always told you have to settle for less. You shouldn't. We want the world and more. Young people shouldn't be saddled with debt. We should have free education. People shouldn't be living in overcrowded housing or temporary housing as many people are now. And to offer that to people, to say we can have this when politicians for decades have told you no, you can't. It was too threatening, and that kind of politics of hope had to be completely dismantled and buried. And I think what happened to the left since then is a reaction to that, because previously, people never thought, well, within the Labour Party, the Labour right never thought there could be a left leader. And Jeremy proved that it was possible. And to really make sure that the left is buried, I think in the words of Peter Mandelson, there has been an even more kind of orchestrated attempt to suppress voices from the left. And that's wrong for many reasons, but mainly because you end up having really bad policy. We've already seen partial U-turns on the winter fuel. We have already seen, a Labour government has to be committed to ending child poverty. So why haven't you scrapped the 2-child benefit cap? Every day you're making a decision that it's okay to have millions of kids in poverty because it's satisfying your spreadsheet. That is deeply shameful and unacceptable. But that's where we are now as a reaction to the left.
Yeah, I'm going to come to the media and your own recent experience with the Daily Mail, which was handled in a way that I don't think I've ever seen a politician handle a query from a newspaper in my life, but we'll come to that in a wee minute. What I did want to talk to you about is, obviously you spoke about child poverty. It's something you feel very strongly about. I had read something which I think would be good to share with the audience about, obviously, the reaction from Jacob Rees-Mogg when there was a £25,000, which is literally changed on the back of the sofa in government policy terms, donated by UNICEF to give breakfast boxes to children. He obviously spoke out against this, and you sent him a present, didn't you? Send him a gift. What did you send him?
I sent him a book, and it was a Charles Dickens book. I said, I don't think this was on the reading list at Eton. You're really testing my memory here.
It was a Christmas Carol.
And he never thanked me or said, I'm pretty sure he got it. But that is the level we are seeing, kind of Victorian levels of poverty and hardship.
It's Hunger Games, it really is.
And he was, I think, at the time receiving huge dividends, and he criticised UNICEF for, which often works internationally, but they recognise the scale of deprivation in the UK, and Jacob Rees-Mogg thought it was acceptable to attack them, and so I think he should do some reading.
But I think that when you look at the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, he is behaving exactly how we would expect him to behave. I suppose the really disappointing thing about policies lately is how the Labour government have surged to the right. Obviously, we know the Conservatives are chasing after reform and the fear there, but Labour have moved themselves closer and closer to the right. And the fact that you lost the whip over a vote against the 2-child cap on benefits is, can you imagine the Labour Party of 30, 40, 50 years ago penalising one of their MPs for that?
And it became a virility test by the men in Downing Street to stamp down on any dissent, but also to show the left who's in charge. And it's disgusting that that was on an issue of child poverty to demonstrate that you are strong men. And now, you know, in my constituency, I look at families and I look at kids in school, and I just think this is avoidable hardship that you're being put through, and it is incumbent on any politician to try to alleviate that. But a Labour government that allows a two-child benefit cap that they were critical of and are all opposing, and all the trade unions affiliated to the Labour Party oppose, is still in place today. They should never have means-tested winter fuel payments, and they've backtracked on that. But next week they're going to announce the first reading of the cuts to disability benefits. And so this is the trajectory that we are on. At every moment we are having to stop or try to stop a Labour government from enacting real hardship and austerity. They're denying its austerity. If you're cutting payments to the elderly, if you are allowing children to live in poverty and you're going to take millions away from disabled people, that is austerity. And that is not the Labour Party that anyone recognises. And we have to also be honest that when people were voting in the general election, they weren't voting for the Labour Party to just change the wallpaper of Downing Street. They wanted fundamental changes that materially improve people's lives. 14 years of devastation, of cuts, of public services on their knees, and now we have a government where some people can't tell the difference of who's announcing a policy. I remember West Streeting at the dispatch box saying, oh, the Tories said that they were going to announce it, but we're doing it as though that's something to be proud of. And we see that both on issues to do with welfare, but also the language around immigration. You know, the Prime Minister copied language that Enoch Powell used. How is that happening? And it has to be challenged. Because like you said, if there was an election today, Nigel Farage would be Prime Minister. And that frightens me. And so it is really important to challenge the demonisation of immigrants, but also all the cuts that are happening, because they're going to make people's lives harder.
And this week, obviously, you've arrived in a week when we've had race hate riots in Ballymena and Portadown and in Larne. People, over 50 families, have had to flee their homes. I was speaking today to someone who works for the fire service who found people cowering with their children and attics, people hiding in wardrobes. They had to smuggle them out onto the back of a fire truck because they were so afraid of what would happen to them that they just had to walk out to safety. And this was all dressed up in a way to claim that it was somehow protecting violence against women and girls, even though it was pregnant women and children were being targeted. We see that a lot in terms of how the far right have mimicked that sort of Tommy Robinson style rhetoric where they dress up their racism as somehow it's a protection of women. And you, as one of the women who spoke out a lot about violence against women and girls, find yourself continually under death threat. What is that like, having to live with that?
It's frightening. I remember Southport, and I didn't leave the house. And in my family WhatsApp group and with my friends, especially those who were visibly Muslim, they were trying to, talk to work to make sure that, things were put in place so they didn't have to go in. And it's 2025, and obviously Southport was 2024 last year. But how are we in this place where people who are racialized, people who are visibly Muslim, people who come from immigrant backgrounds are literally scared to step foot in their own communities because they might get killed? And in Southport, we saw violence against mosques, and a migrant hotel literally burned because people wanted people inside there to die. That's attempted murder. And that is where the far right have been organising. We know that they are incredibly organised online, but they also have politicians that are speaking the same language in Parliament. And this isn't just reform. Suella Braverman in the last Parliament was talking about an invasion on the coast of the southeast. We've had even, the language used by Labour politicians. There was a Labour MP who used the Commons platform or the benches to talk about a migrant hotel in her constituency, named it, and that was also attacked by the far right. And we see the role the media has played, the Daily Mail, the Sun, but so much across so many front pages. And so this hasn't happened overnight. It has been drip fed from the media and from our politicians. And when I went on GMB, after Southport, I was kind of asked, why do you think it's Islamophobic? Why do you think it's racist? And kind of, you know, the kind of reluctance to address the root cause of this. And unless you name it, unless you describe it, unless you say what it is, you're never going to be able to tackle it. And we have huge levels of complicity, but it's people who will never recognise it. And this Labour government is basically creating the fertile ground, boasting about deportation flights, and so much more that makes me deeply worried. And I'm seeing it happening before my eyes in real time.
It's one of the things, I suppose, as someone who works in the media, we continually hear this phrase used, legitimate concerns, and legitimate concerns is never legitimate when you actually drill down.
Racism is not a legitimate concern.
When you drill down as to what the actual concerns are, they're usually based in falsehoods, in messages spread online. And what we've noticed and what I've noticed this week is that the American far right are cosplaying Irish people and trying to then stir tensions. This is something that is being globally orchestrated and is actually funded to a high degree in order to cause disruption around the world.
Absolutely, and historically, ever since I was a student, you could draw lines between American far right, money coming to think tanks, then the politicians that are then using those reports at these so-called legitimate Westminster kind of think tanks are using, the Henry Jackson Society, some of the others like that, and the kind of Islamophobia that then is being enacted through policy. And you can see how that kind of legitimization pipeline works. And you see across Europe as well. The far right are very well organized across Europe, across America, and the role that, and I don't think we are really going to out-organize them until we recognize the scale of activity happening.
I mean, anyone who is in the public eye continually, I suppose, is subject to that online abuse, which, you know, I live under death threat as a journalist, but I can protect myself in a way that people don't necessarily have to know where I am, apart from I'm here, but I don't think anyone are going to attack me tonight. As an MP, you have to be seen in your constituency. People have to know, you have to do your constituency work and be there. How are you protecting yourself from this attack? And do you genuinely feel in the future that you could be subject to attack? We've seen people like Joe Cox murdered. And
I worry about it. My family worry about it. My loved ones worry about it. And I know that there's a correlation when I speak up for migrants' rights, when I speak up for Palestinian rights, and when I challenge, racism. There is a correlation in terms of how much abuse I get, online, email, letters, and so forth. And so I've had to increase kind of security. I am mindful of using different routes in public transport and all of these things that, as women, we grow up, we're always looking behind our shoulder, we're always making sure we've got the key, we're always sending our location, to friends and family, everyone's checking in when you've kind of left an event. We grow up with that as women, but it takes on another level when people want you to kind of shut up. And I get that quite a lot. The kind of racism is, the P word, go back to where you come from, and it's like, it's Birmingham, it's a train journey. But it's this kind of, you don't belong here. And to kind of accept that is a normal part of your job is really quite tough. And I always, talk to young women who are really interested in going to politics, and I think of all the abuse Diane Abbott went through. Has anything changed? No, I think it's got worse. And so I don't want to be in the same place in 10, 20 years' time where there is a new generation of women who have gone into politics who are being attacked because they're young or because they're women. With me, it's because I'm young, I'm Muslim, I'm left-wing, and I'm a woman of colour. It's all of those things together.
You're just ticking off.
Yeah, all the boxes.
Aren't you?
Yeah.
Well, as the MP for Coventry, obviously you speak out on behalf of your constituency, you speak out about violence against women and girls, but we have, I'm sure everyone in this room has noticed, I have noticed in following your career, that you have made several really powerful speeches in the Commons in relation to our situation here in Ireland, including speeches about Pafanucan, speeches about the legacy inquiry. Tell us about your interest in our conflict and what's happened here.
I actually studied about the Troubles during my GCSEs, and often I'm quite critical.
I am horrified that people are studying the Troubles as part of the GCSEs. We're old, are we all feeling? It's like history.
But there's often I'm quite critical of our curriculum and how it doesn't really talk about British Empire. as someone whose family is from Kashmir, you always kind of learn your own family history, and you kind of put the jigsaw together yourself. You never really taught about it. It's through families, it's through those kind of oral stories. But we did touch on the troubles during my GCSEs, and I was always interested in this part of the world. And then I went to Palestine, and then I was connecting these dots myself, learning about the rich tradition of Irish internationalism, to the extent where I did my dissertation at university. I studied international relations, and I did it on transitional justice, looking at Northern Ireland and South Africa and whether that could be applied to Israel and Palestine. So my interest in this part of the world is very deep, but it's the inspiration that you give to the rest of the world that you can overcome, that even when the biggest forces in the world, the British state, are fighting against you, you can win. But it's also the everyday work of internationalism that the Bloody Sunday Trust does with Palestinians, with natives, Native Americans, with other oppressed people across the world. That is something that I feel very passionate about, because we're only like a group of people, but when we look at what we can achieve collectively as a class, it's massively inspirational.
Where do you think the home is going to be in the future for people like you, people of the left, and young people who, as you said, who want to get into politics, young women who want to get into politics, and the natural home for them in the past would have been the Labour Party? It was where you went to in your youth, but the Labour Party of the moment has moved so far. Do you think, first of all, is there hope to bring that back? And if not, where then do people who have your kind of politics go?
When I speak to students at university and I talk about my political journey and I tell them that that route does not exist anymore, I have to tell them to carve out their own spaces. And in terms of political parties, they might not find that representation, but it will come, because politicians have to respond to what is happening in our communities, and if they are not reflective, then that change has to be forced upon them electorally. I think young people are finding their political homes at the moment through the environment movement. I think it's through the Palestine movement, but it's not electoral. And so people like me and others on the left have to do the work inside the Labour Party, but also outside of the Labour Party to build those spaces. We know that it can't just be one person who's a figurehead, it has to be a collective movement where young people can see people who are speaking their language, who are in our communities, and it's not just about Westminster. And I think that is one of the limitations of, I think, Corbynism, where a lot of us put all of our hopes in electoral politics, where trade unions and their membership should have been also boosted, and social movements have always carried on, but there needs to be real accountability, and we also need stronger trade unions as well. So electoral politics definitely is important. I mean, I'm literally a politician, but it's not the be all and end all. But at this moment in time, political parties are completely failing young people. They're failing the elderly. They're failing, women. And so something has to change.
Yeah, I mean, we can go. I'm going to move now onto the media, and it's obviously one of the that you have been now. Corbyn was the target of the right-wing media. You are now, it appears, target number one. You're now target number one of the Daily Mail. They came to you recently, and just obviously you've just mentioned the trade unions. You've always had the support of trade unions through both of the elections that you have fought. They came for you not about something you've done this time, but this is where they start treating women like chattel about your husband.
Yes, he's in the audience. Hello.
It's all your fault.
It's always, and it's crazy because it's like I must only know about trade unions or support trade unions because I'm married to someone who works in a trade union, because God forbid we don't, and he tells me what to do. Obviously, I mean, he wishes, but that was inevitable because the right-wing press, when they don't have anything else to go after you on, because they can't attack you on your politics, it then becomes your personal life. And I've always been really mindful of protecting my family and my loved ones, because I'm the one who signed up for this. No one else signed up for this. And I'm, electorally, people can vote for me, not vote for me. People can criticise the way I vote in Parliament. I'm subjected to public scrutiny, that's what I signed up to, but no one else is. So that was quite difficult, but it was really important to tell them to go fuck themselves, quite literally, because I think the way the British media is, it does not hold power to account. It attacks downwards rather than, attacking the people who are enacting, hardship, cutting people's benefits, selling arms to a genocidal state. They will attack refugees, they will attack trans people, they will attack the most marginalised. And so I have no time for it. I am not trying to be your friend.
I have thought that by your response. It's literally one of the funniest things. It's in about 20 group chats I'm in where people saying, "Oh, have you seen this?"
Yeah.
It was hilarious responses ever.
It was really important to not concede. And as someone who has seen the role of the press in perpetuating Islamophobia, perpetuating anti-migrant rhetoric, attacking the left, I have got no time to try to be your friend. I'm not interested in it. The job that I have is fighting, the forces of fascism in our country and stopping a Labour government from continuing facilitating genocide. My priorities are quite clear and set out. So you're wasting my time. And actually, what is also quite annoying was the timing of it. It literally was sent to me on Eid. I was celebrating with my family, which is actually a form of Islamophobia in of itself, that press request. And it's really important that people do not, try to appease these forces. They will never work with us. They will always work against us. And so we're not going to, waste our time.
I think that one of the things, and it's actually a full circle about how we started, is, now I would say it's different here, but in the London media and even to extent in the Dublin media, when you have a city where the cost of living is so expensive, where rent is so expensive, and where a trainee journalist wage is our pitiful, the only people who are ever going to be able to do that job are the elite, the Boris Johnsons of this world, and they have that boxed off as a job that they will only be able to have. Nobody from working class community could afford to live on a trainee journalist wage in a city like London, and they know that, and it's the same as the expenses and everything else. I mean, I was a teenage parent from West Belfast. I wouldn't have been allowed to brush the floors of the Daily Mail, never mind be a journalist in the past, or the Express, or any of those papers. And that is why I think that they continually use their power, and it is a growing power, and they have the backing to come for people like you and try and shape the narrative and shape the arguments.
They would rather smear me and try to, and they've done it with politicians in the past, and I've seen what's happened to people who organise on Palestine. I'm a Liverpool fan, so I saw what happened. I heard about Hillsborough from a really young age. I knew about the Stephen Lawrence case as a child, and so I've always seen the media in a particular lens of people who are working, in cahoots with the state, in cover-ups, who attack the most marginalised. They are not, just relaying stories. They are actively shaping a narrative that benefits their billionaire owners and their political agenda. And it has to be seen through that lens, because we need to therefore invest in local media. We need to invest in working class voices, left media projects, because that is never going to be a space that is friendly to our type of politics and the world that we're trying to build.
In terms of the language, and this is another media question, if you go back to 2016, Kitty Hopkins lost her job as a columnist with The Sun for saying things which are now part of the mainstream political discourse. We had people like Ben Habib saying exactly what Kitty Hopkins said in 2016 during the last election, and barely raised an eyebrow. The fact that in those short space of time that kind of really, really racist language has become acceptable.
Normalised.
Yeah. And that's something obviously that you suffered greatly in your community and the people you represent are suffering from.
Absolutely. The shift to the right, both in our media and our politics, has created this scenario where Nigel Farage, who couldn't get elected to Parliament 7 times, is poised to be Prime Minister based on polls right now. And that is what we see happening across Europe. It's what we see happening, obviously, in the US. We've seen it in Brazil, in India, there isn't kind of, an exceptionalism at play that we cannot, have someone like him in power. And so the left, trade unions, all of us have to get organised and challenge this, and it's not going to happen overnight. Before I got elected, I was working as a community organiser for the Labour Party, and you don't achieve outcomes in that line of work overnight. It's everyday conversations, it's the real kind of unglamorous work, and we have to start doing it now, otherwise we're gonna see really dangerous things being passed even before Farage gets into power, because it's aping his politics to stop him. And we know that people don't vote for the copy, they vote for the original. And so I really worry about that. I want to see trade unions do more in terms of countering that rise in the far right. And I understand that if Reform is polling 26% nationally, that is also within their own membership. I understand that's difficult, but you have to do the work, you have to speak up, you need to organise not just demonstrations, you have to also be in communities doing that work, that education work, and I just think we have to do so much more.
So, can we please have a big round of applause for the absolutely amazing Zarah Sultana.